everyone. I'm Kristen Miller Zohn. I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Lauren Rogers Museum of Art in Laurel, Mississippi. And today I'm thrilled to be speaking with Charly Palmer, an artist in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Charly. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. So I've asked you here today because we've been doing a series of interviews with artists whose works have entered our collection in the last couple of years.
Okay.
And we are the proud owners of your piece Leadbelly from 2012. So we're gonna come back to this piece at the end of our talk after we've seen some other of your pieces. Before we get started with that, if you could just give us some information about your background.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out the quickest way to say this. I was born in a small town in Alabama called Fayettete. When I was 4 years old, I had one older brother and two younger brother and sister. My parents, we all moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and that was in the early '60s, 1964. So the youngest was a newborn, and so I was raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and went to high school there, went to middle school, high school there. And after I graduated from high school, I went to the School of the Arts Art Institute in Chicago. Chicago's only 98 miles away from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so it was fairly close, less than 2 hours away. And so I went to the Art Institute and spent 2 years there, majoring in art history and American art. I transferred to the American Academy of Art, also in Chicago, because I knew going in, I did not make the best decision to do enough research, that I really ultimately wanted to be an illustrator. And so I went to the American Academy of Art because I saw that it was a very tough program. And I really wanted to learn how to truly do this thing, to navigate it. And so went to the American Academy of Art, completed that program, I think in 1982. And since that time, I worked for almost 20 years as an illustrator. And then I've been working the last 20 years or so as a fine artist. And I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, just prior to the Olympics, and had an opportunity to do a lot of Olympic work, including being one of the official artists that created a limited edition poster for the games itself. I've been working and creating mostly my fine art ever since.
So you say you started out as an illustrator, and I was reading in your biography that you were very influenced by this book. Can you tell us about how you came to know this book and how it's influenced you?
I think the significance of Jack Key's work is that not even being conscious of it, but as a 4 and 5 year old, I wasn't even at a reading level yet, but there was something about his word that resonated because it spoke to me. When I looked at the work, I saw me. And you don't typically, even today, you don't see typically enough representation of Black children in books. I've been doing children books, and I kind of realized that too often, even when it comes to the less than 5% of the children books that are produced every year have to do with Black children or Black history, but the majority of those have to do with Black history. And the only reason I say that is like the snowy day was never about a little Black kid. It was about a snowy day where a kid could stay home from school and play in the snow. And so that's what I really kind of like pushed, because if I, in the end, I'm probably more recognized for my children's book, I think it would be an absolute honor, because I want to make that kind of contribution to the world, to create books of Black children in a way that they can identify with themselves. So what the thing about Keyes' work is that Keyes, there's even a children book award that's based after him. It was the textures and the patterns and the simplicity. And I was not even consciously aware of it, but it influenced my work to the point where once I was done with college and was doing illustration and then finally decided to kind of pursue more of an interest in my fine art, there was still a slight influence of the simplicity and patterns and textures in my work. I think the thing about Dragon in the Closet, Dragon in the Closet was actually written by my ex-wife. And it, again, it's a fascinating story about a mischievous dragon And what I love so much about the whimsical story of the kid trying to explain to his parents who have no imagination that there's a dragon that's making a mess of the house and doing all these funny things. And again, the story isn't about being a Black child. It's about a child encountering a dragon. And so the child just happens to be Black. And so there are little things throughout the story, including like, which I've played with in a couple of my books. I like having like the companion, and the companion is often some kind of dog. And the dog doesn't play, again, any real role other than he just seems to always be there. And I wanted to suggest with Dragon in the Closet that maybe the dog is doing it until you find out at the end what's actually happening. But my first actual major assignment was the story of Miriam Makeba and how she spread her love and her songs throughout the world and made a difference for apartheid that was going on in Africa. That was another one of those assignments that it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but I felt like at least I was telling a story that was original and a story that had rich culture to it, but rich textures and color and all these things that were the influences that came from Keyes's work.
Tell us about this album cover, John Legend album, Bigger Love.
What's really important about that story is that a lot of people talk about what happened with the pandemic, and it affected a lot of people in many sort of interesting ways. There were artists that had a very difficult time trying to be creative. They were not getting as much contact with clients or museums and galleries. And of course, galleries and museums were not open. I think it shifted the world in a way that it will ever be shifted differently. And some of that is not necessarily so bad. But during that pandemic, shortly after the world was shut down, I got a text message, not a text message, I'm sorry, an email from Sony Records asking me if I would be interested in doing John Legend's cover. And I was first surprised that John Legend knew I existed. I was secondly surprised that it wasn't like me and 5 other artists and whoever work was the strongest would get the cover. It was like, no, he wants you to do the cover. And what was really also beautiful about that experience is that my wife and I had just spent a month in South Africa. And so I had taken lots of pictures of landscapes in South Africa. I had also been fascinated by a particular flower, a protea flower, and it happens to be the national flower of South Africa. And so the bold red flower that's on John Legend's shoulder is actually the protea flower. And so in talking to him initially about what I was thinking about, I referenced that particular flower and also referenced South Africa. And what John informed me of at the time was that South Africa is actually his second best market in the world. And so again, it's like I watched how, and if you look at his hair, there's the galaxies, there are stars in the universe. And it was at a time where everything in my world and in the world was shifting. And so that's been now an ongoing theme through a lot of work that I've been doing for the past 2 years.
Flowers often make an appearance in your work, including this piece that was featured on the cover of Time magazine. How did this come about?
Well, the same thing. It was like when B.L. Pine, who is the art director for Time magazine, reached out to me, my assumption was that he had seen the John Legend cover, because the one thing about John Legend's cover is that he actually released the artwork a week before he released the music and introduced me to the world. But I assumed that's where Mr. Pine had seen my work, but he said that he had been in Atlanta and had seen some of my work in an exhibit called Silent Series, and Silent Series incorporated the American flag. And so in the American flag, it was Black people behind stars and stripes, but sometimes the flag stripes or the stars were covering their mouth. And so this issue had to do with the idea that America must change. There is a racial tension that's been brought on by certain powers to be. And so we are asking the questions like, what can we do to make a difference? Because we all have to actively take a role. Well, DL had never seen the John Legend thing, but had remembered the other thing, and said he even showed me a sketch where he had taken a piece that I had done from a prior show, the Silent Series, and had put it on Time magazine just to give me an idea what his image was. And that's what made it real for me. It was at that point, I'm like, they're serious about this. And so it was very exciting. Initially, the concept for me was that it was going to be a woman as opposed to a little child, because in her hair there's a riot and there's fire and there's protest, and I'm like, I envisioned the woman, but I started asking myself the question simply, why is it that in 2020 my grandchildren have to still be fearful of being endangered in this country that is supposed to be all of ours? And so I decided to make it a young lady as opposed to a woman, which it speaks to me very much because her name is Carolina. Carolina has been a muse of mine for years. It's something about her face, her attitude, and everything that I've painted several times. And she's the cover of the magazine. And it's funny, like one of the assignments I gave her, Carolina, is to come in every couple of weeks and sign some of the Time magazine covers. So when I'm gifting people or selling the cover with my signature on it, it also has the signature of her as really being the reason why it is as strong in images.
We have some additional images of some recent works, and we're just going to go through them, and you can tell us about them. They're all from this year, or
yeah. So I think a lot of the works that are going to be the ones that we're going through right now are from the series The Power of B, and the power of B is BE, and so everything that's in this show starts with a BE, and it started from a piece called Becoming, and Becoming is four Black figures, and Becoming was a piece that one day I'm walking my dog. I have we have two pugs, Pugsley and Blue, and I was walking Pugsley, and beside the dumpster behind our building was this stretch canvas, not the canvas, but the stretcher itself, stretcher bar. And I'm looking at this thing, and it was in great condition. And I was really like, why? Maybe the universe has simply left this for me to do something with. And so I took that bar and I stuck it in my car and drove it to the studio. And I sat down and I sketched out an idea. And the idea is called Becoming. And Becoming, because I didn't even know when I initially started sketching it what the meaning of my sketch was. But then I started to realize that it was the idea, it was the journey of the Africa to America. And so it was from Africa or West Africa to the Middle Passage and slavery, to the protest and civil rights movement. And then the last figure represents the future and projecting what would be next. And so that piece, I looked at it and said, that's Becoming. And then when I did Becoming, I started looking at the second to last figure. And because of the bicep of the figure at the end, she kind of looked pregnant. And so I ended up doing a second piece called Beginning. And then I did Beyond, and then I started doing a series of works based on just the power of the word BE. And so like, I also led to, when we started talking about, it was the election coming up and everything like that. And, in the end, we know we had Kamala Harris, who became the first Black female vice president. But I started thinking about the image of Shirley Chisholm. And Shirley Chisholm has always been one of my heroes. And she's someone that people don't talk about enough. And so I started thinking about it, like, I want to do a Shirley Chisholm. And so the Shirley Chisholm piece is called Be First. And it was like, for those, and in fact, I was talking to someone a couple of days ago who had never heard of her before. And it really surprised me. And yeah, she was the first to actually first Black person to run for the position as president. And so, but I also, when I started thinking about the Shirley Chisholm work, it was like, I can stay safe in the space that I always do, or I can experiment again and try something a little bit different. And so looking at that piece, you'll see everyone who knows who Shirley Chisholm is looks at this piece and says, that's Shirley Chisholm. And like, okay, so I was able to accomplish, but I think it was those big glasses of hers and a strong, regal face. And so I only have a little bit of her face, but it's enough of her face. And then the big glasses and that big hairstyle that speaks out and says Shirley Chisholm. And so that was a piece. that kind of really I thought was a turning point, but at this point, quite honestly, I don't even know if I'm certain about that, because I love the idea that I really don't know what's next, and I kind of let the spirit and my energy and thoughts and everything kind of take me someplace as opposed to me leading. I think I was talking to a great composer, cellist who lives here in Atlanta, Georgia. His name is Okori Johnson. And Okori is saying one day, he says, when people talk about artist block, it's not an artist block, it's an artist blocking. Because if you understand from the creative process, that's bigger than you. It is so much bigger than you, and you're just being channeled and fed creativity and ideas. And so, block is you blocking those gifts, those messages, those ideas. And so, all you have to do as a creative person is learn to get out of the way. And so, like, I've learned some time ago to get out of the way. So it's like when I hear people talk about artist blocks, it's like I can't even relate, because there are so many ideas in my head always that I'll probably never be able to accomplish all of them. Be on the lookout is also a good representation of the new body of work that I've just created. I have a show opening at Hammond House, actually opened April 30th, and it's called Departure. And Departure is all about the idea of me stepping away from, again, what I'm comfortable with and trying something a little bit different, or attempting, experimenting. And so Be on the Lookout came from a show that I did a year ago, which I ended up doing a series on, and it had to do with, the Middle Passage. So there's slave ships in it, there are shackles in it, there's these beautiful images of beautiful little boys. And it's this idea of like, when we talk in the Black community about monitoring the behavior of police officers in our country, it's this whole idea that we feel that we're being policed and we're not being protected. And so being on the lookout is more being on the lookout for the police, because we don't feel necessarily protected. We feel put upon and policed and controlled and murdered in certain cases. So it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have, but it's our daily experience. And so Be on the Lookout is very much about the idea of what we're still confronting, like almost on a daily basis. One of the things that you'll see continuously, and we talked about that before, is the flowers. And sometimes the flowers are used as a distraction. There's an expression called wag the dog, where when something is going on over here that might be important, there is this attempt to create something in another direction that gets your attention, but it's not relevant or important or significant. But while you're focused on that thing, in this case, in certain cases, for me, it's the flowers, there's this whole other image here that you're not paying attention to. And so the flowers that are at the bottom of this shadow box is my attempt to distract from, you'll see there are Black people in shackles representing slaves. There are Black people being arrested and police officers in riot gear. You will see an actual chain that's attached to it. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner, there's an opening in the shadow box where there's a piece where there are bars again. And if you look closely into those bars, you'll see, again, Black people in shackles. And so there's a lot going on, including a three-dimensional ship. And the ship was something that a neighbor of mine, he has a job where he clears out houses when people have left some of their property there. And he often will keep some of the things he'll just throw away. But one day he was throwing away a ship as I was pulling up in my driveway, and I saw next door the ship, and I had no idea what I could possibly do with it. But I approached him and asked him for permission to have it. And I held on to it for about a year. And then one day I realized exactly what I wanted to use it for. So that's how I incorporated also the ship that led to the whole piece. So if you can imagine, a lot of the work that I do is very organic. It's like, I don't know what something's going to look like sometime until it's nearly completed, because I try to be still, and I try to pay attention to where it wants to go, and I try to follow it there.
another piece that has three-dimensional elements in it is Beautiful Blue. Can you tell us about this piece?
Okay, so for the again, I realized that beautiful starts with a BE, but I have a friend of mine who is a fashion designer, and in fact, she was on the competition on Lifetime called Project Runway, and um, her name is Kendra Freeman, Kenya Freeman. I'm sorry, Kenya Freeman, and Kenya and I had met about 2 years prior, and we got to talking about the idea of collaborating, like how can we work together? How can we do something together? And I love the idea of collaboration. I love the idea of you do your thing and I'll do my thing, and somehow we'll bring these things together, and hopefully it'll come together well. And my experience has been almost every time I've done something like that, somehow it works. Especially if two creative people have respect for what each other does. And like, excuse me, what I did not mention when it came to even becoming is in becoming there is an original piece of music that is created by Okori Johnson, uh, Melisha Taylor, and DJ Salah. And Salah is a producer, arranger, DJ. And so the three of them came together and they created a piece that represents that whole journey from beginning to end. And so I kind of like gave them the idea, the concept, gave them the painting to look at it, make a piece of sound that kind of speaks to this piece. Well, with Kenya, it was kind of the same thing. It was like, I want you to create a dress, and I want you just to kind of let free and do whatever it is that you want to do. And from what you do, I will do a interpretation and find a way to complement what you were doing. And so you utilizing the black shadow box again. I started working on a piece, because she had sent me some fabrics and the colors and everything. And then I also, when I was completed, I showed her the rough sketch and everything of what I was doing. She created the dress, gave it to me, and when I mounted the dress, it seemed to be missing something. And so again, of course, it was like, you know what? This is not going to stand alone unless I can find some way of complementing it. And I think the complementing elements were the balance of the bluish flowers at the bottom. It almost matched the dress, and then also incorporating above the head of the mannequin a black slave ship, because it's like I think that's the thing that always goes back to my narrative about who I am and what I'm doing and what I want to remember, and what I also want to remind my viewers who's looking at the work of where I stand.
Is this the only piece with a garment that you produced?
Actually, there's two pieces. There's Beautiful Blue and there's Beautiful Bloom. And Bloom is another dress that Kenya created. And what I love about those is like my contribution to both of those pieces are more abstract. And there's something about the journey of abstraction that I totally enjoy. But part of it is that people make the assumption that doing an abstract is fairly easy. I find doing an abstract kind of difficult, because I'm conscious of the same elements and the same rules: balance, harmony, structure, composition, all these kind of things. But how does it feel? And I feel that paintings should always have a feeling. And so I'm trying to seek that feeling when I'm creating something. Like, how does it make you feel? And I feel that if I have not created something that makes you feel something, that creatively I've failed to create as an artist.
So in these pieces, then you can concentrate on the feeling in the background, and then the garments become the figures.
Right.
Pieces so you're not providing the figures in those pieces as you usually
No.
do. You're getting to concentrate on other things.
Right. Totally.
I'm looking now at Benevolent. I see some things that we've seen in other pieces, but in completely different ways here.
So, but Benevolent, I started to incorporate all the BE words that I could come up with. So one day I just brainstormed and wrote down anything I could come up with. But what I was reminded of is there was a young man by the name of Khalif Browder. And Khalif Browder died at the age of 22. And what had happened was Khalif was arrested at the age of 17, accused of stealing someone's backpack. The backpack was not found on him. He swore he was innocent. They took him to jail. They put him at Rikers Island. And the young man spent 3 years on Rikers Island, half of that time in solitary confinement. They say that someone spending more than 22 days in solitary confinement can permanently, emotionally, mentally damage you. He spent a year and a half, but in the times that he was free, he was either beaten and severely neglected by the guards or beaten by other inmates. And so when he came out, was finally released because they felt they didn't have a strong enough case after 3 years, it was too late. He was damaged, and so he could not function. He was feeling paranoia. He was feeling bipolar, and he eventually committed suicide. And because that story spoke so strongly to me, because I'm fearful and aware that those stories are not, sadly, as uncommon as we would hope they would be for the Black body, I had made a promise that I would always remember Khalif and find a way to honor him every year. So when I was doing this piece, the series, I knew I had to do a piece with Khalif in it. And that's where Benevolence came from. It was the whole idea of just his strength, because there were certain things like he was beaten by gang members because he refused to join a gang. He refused to admit his guilt because he said he was innocent. And so all those things are things that I thought showed his strength. And so I wanted to do another piece to kind of honor him.
So talk about the motifs that are in the piece and how that speaks to him being honored.
Yeah, so like if you look at Khalif's, the hands that are reaching out on the left and the right, they almost look like claws, but they also kind of represent to me horns like that of a deer. Again, we're haunted. We're hunted like deer in deer season, hunting season for young Black men and Black men in general. And so I kind of want to address that. I wanted to incorporate, again, we're trying to navigate this world in this country that has a real big issue with us. And so it's like those kinds of things that I want to continue to kind of reiterate. But in the end, there's a word in there that says being. And I think it's the whole idea of where we can be still and just be. It's important that we understand that we are simply all human beings, and please find a way to find within your humanity the recognition that we're all more alike than we are different. And so it's that kind of thing that beloved, in the words that you will see there, is all about this love and my love of Black people.
This one feels very timely. It's called Protect Her.
This piece was inspired by a photograph by a friend of mine, Melissa Alexander, who goes by Phyllis Iller. And she Carolina is her daughter. And so the first time I came to know Melissa was through seeing a photograph that she had taken of her daughter. And I asked her, I would love to paint that. And since then, I've worked with her, Melinda, on several pieces. But what she did a series of photographs called Drive By. So during the time of COVID, what she did was she invited people to come by her house, and she would shoot them outside on the street, as long as they're wearing masks. And it was such a brilliant kind of idea that like families would come, and some of them would just sit in their car. She would get pictures of them in their car, just outside their car. And when she posted some of them, I saw this particular image of the family holding their daughter, actually putting the helmet on her daughter. And it may have been a Hello Kitty helmet or something, but the universe was the idea that came to mind again for me. And this idea that, again, these children are our future. And they're thinking, maybe not at this point, how big a role they might play in the world. But as parents, we're extremely protective of them. And we want to make sure they've got their helmets on, and to go even further. And I had not addressed that yet in any of my works. Let's put a face mask on to protect them from the exposure. And so that's where I also was able to incorporate the flowers. And so this is one of those, like I thought, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, we will not be talking about COVID, I hope. And when we don't, but this will date this piece in a way, timestamp it as that time when we did have to wear masks and how that was kind of an interesting period in our lives. So that's what that piece is about, the whole idea of loving parents protecting their child, but also time stamping it for a period in our lives that hopefully we'll be over with real soon.
And how these times are going to affect children and what they're going to be thinking about their childhood when they look back at this. So it's interesting that this is a child who might look at actually at this exact painting 20 years from now and think back to what her life was like during this time and how it affected the rest of her life going forward.
Yeah. And I would hope that what we've seen in the last year and a half or less won't become the norm, so that we look back on it and we're still experiencing it, but it would be more like I remember those days. But when it comes to children who aren't necessarily in a school environment that they were once used to, although homeschooling became more of a trend in the last 5 or 6 years, children engaging and interacting with other children is something that we're all been used to, but we're finding more and more that their engagement is on a screen. And so hopefully that's not going to become the norm. But I can't help but wonder what will be what's next for them.
Right, right. Charly, thank you so much for taking us on that journey through some of your recent works. I'd like to go back in history a little bit to 2012 and look at the piece that is in the Lauren Rogers Museum's collection, Leadbelly. I think this was part of a series of paintings. Can you tell us about that series and about this painting in particular?
Okay. So Leadbelly was actually a series of works which were part of um, the stained glass window. And so I'm trying to remember, stained glass window may have come from, I think I was sitting in my parents' church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a beautiful sunlight came through on this beautiful stained glass window. And when I looked at it, I began to think, we don't often see Black images in stained glass windows. And so I started asking again the question, what would it look like to see that representation? And so I ended up doing a series, probably about 40 paintings, where each incorporated this whole painting my traditional way and then going back in and almost fragmenting it and adding little lines to separate different parts of it. And I found it to be fascinating, intriguing, and a lot of fun. And but as I started to, I looked at Black family and Black love and Black experiences. And at some point, I think I started to explore possibly historical figures. And then, like, I think I did it. I do have in the studio right now, I have a piece of B.B. King. But I started looking at legendary musical artists. And Leadbelly has always been an intriguing figure to me. There's a lot of folklore behind who this man is or was, but he was just that image that I wanted to do something to give him, again, a regal, statuesque kind of feeling, but strength at the same time. But I wanted to put him in stained glass window because stained glass window was never for me about religion. It was more about the imagery itself.
Storytelling was what the stained glass windows were for originally. They
Mhm.
were for people who couldn't read so that they could learn about stories from the Bible. And so musicians are storytellers themselves, so it seems apropos that Leadbelly should be in a stained glass window.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great explanation of that piece, and we are so proud and honored to have it in the collection. Charly, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I hope you have an excellent rest of your year, and I hope people can come to the museum to see this piece by you, Leadbelly, and we'll put your website in the description for the video so people can go and check out more of your work. Thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.